Have you ever wondered how therapy actually works? I mean, beyond the conversations, the insights, what's truly happening underneath it all? What makes the change stick?
Yeah, it's a big question. And for a long time, even, within psychoanalysis itself, how change happens wasn't always clearly spelled out. Lots of assumptions.
Exactly. So today, we're doing a deep dive into a really foundational text that kicked off a lot of this thinking. James Strachey's classic 1934 paper, The Nature of the Therapeutic Action of Psychoanalysis.
A real landmark piece.
Our mission here is to unpack Strachey's big idea, this concept of the mutative interpretation. We want to explore how his insights, which were pretty controversial back then, really laid the groundwork for understanding lasting psychological change.
And we'll connect it to other key thinkers, too. See how it still informs therapy practice today. We'll be looking right at Strachey's original paper, of course.
Which is dense but really rewarding, as you said before we started.
Definitely. And we'll also draw on a commentary from 1999 that gives some perspective on his legacy.
Okay, let's get into it. This paper, it really forces you to think differently about what makes therapy effective, doesn't it?
It really does. Historically, there was this big debate in psychoanalysis about the engine of change. Was it mainly about interpreting the transference, how old patterns play out with the analyst?
Right.
Understanding the projections.
Or was it more about the therapeutic relationship itself being the healing factor?
A classic split.
And Strachey's mutative interpretation sort of became the classic model focusing on transference interpretation. It was the idea everyone else had to grapple with or build upon.
So at the heart of it is this mutative interpretation focusing on that transference distortion. And it starts with a really interesting idea, doesn't it? That the patient puts the analyst in the role of an auxiliary superego. What exactly did he mean by that?
Well, think of the superego as that internal critic, the conscience, largely built from early experiences with parents or authority figures. Strachey proposed the patient unconsciously starts treating the analyst as if they are part of that internal critical structure. Okay, like a temporary stand-in.
Exactly. And in this role, the analyst kind of implicitly allows a little bit of a deed energy, say, an aggressive impulse or wish to be expressed by the patient.
And crucially, that impulse is aimed at the analyst.
Right. The analyst becomes the direct target in the here and now.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The patient has this sort of aha moment.
They realize that the real person of the analyst isn't reacting like the archaic object, that old internal figure that the impulse is really aimed at.
They expect criticism or anger or whatever the old pattern dictates,
Yeah.
but they don't get it.
Precisely. The patient sees the gap between their internal projection, that harsh introject, and the actual real analyst sitting there.
And that gap is where the change happens.
Yes. It allows the patient to internalize the analyst as a new kind of object, a less aggressive introject, and that in turn starts to modify the harshness of their own superego.
So it's not just understanding things intellectually. It's a fundamental rewiring based on a new lived experience within the therapy relationship, like updating your internal operating system.
That's a great way to put it. And Strachey actually broke this down into two phases. Phase one is about raising awareness.
Making the unconscious conscious, basically.
Sort of. The analyst helps the patient become aware of that internal tension, the superego threatening punishment because of an id impulse. It means making that id relation to the analyst conscious, seeing the feeling as it happens directed at the analyst.
And then phase two, that's the critical part, isn't it?
That's the patient's realization. Okay, the fantasy object I'm reacting to and the real person of the analyst, they're different. But this only works if the analyst handles it correctly.
Right, the analyst's skill is paramount here.
Absolutely. Strachey hammered this point home. The analyst must avoid acting like that fantasy object. No shock, no anger, no retaliation when faced with the patient's raw impulse.
That restraint is everything.
It's vital, because only then can the patient see the discrepancy clearly and internalize the analyst as a new modifying force for their superego. It's fascinating how active the analyst's non-action is here.
It's not passive waiting.
Not at all. It's about providing that consistent, real presence against which the patient can test their internal world. Which does raise a question, doesn't it? For anyone, really. What does it take for you to hold back when someone's projecting intense stuff onto you? To let them see the real you, not just their projection.
It's a challenge. And it's funny because Strachey's work was often seen as championing interpretation over the relationship, wasn't it?
That was a common interpretation, yeah. An oversimplification, perhaps.
But if you read him closely, that internalization of a new relationship, modifying those internal objects, It seems absolutely central, even if interpretation kicks it off.
Definitely. It's not interpretation or relationship, it's how they interact. Later thinkers, like Hans Lowald, perhaps put more explicit emphasis on this internalization, comparing analysis to a kind of reparenting.
Where the patient internalizes healthy aspects of the analyst, like a child with a parent.
Exactly. And you see similar ideas over in the UK with Bayon's containment and Winnicott's holding. The therapist takes in difficult projections,
Sort of detoxifies them.
detoxifies them, modifies them, and gives them back in a more manageable form. Ogden later clarified this actually changes the way the therapist and patient interact, creating new ways to experience old stuff.
So that old split between insight and relationship seems less relevant now.
Much less so. The field has moved towards seeing them as synergistic. Insight and these corrective relational moments, they feed each other. It's awful hard to disentangle them in the thick of it. You probably can't even maintain an understanding relationship without some insight into what's happening in that relationship.
And there are newer models that try to integrate this explicitly.
Yes, like Jones's model of repetitive interaction structures. It looks at the recurring patterns and how therapist and patient interact and links specific patterns to change. It emphasizes both the experiencing, the relating, and the understanding, the interpreting.
It really connects to ideas like role responsiveness, enactment, projective identification, that whole complex interplay.
Right. And it also connects to something else, the historical, maybe unfair stigmatizing of supportive therapy.
As if it wasn't real analysis.
Kind of. But major research, like the Menninger project reported by Wallerstein, showed that lasting structural change can happen through non-interpretive supportive means.
And crucially, even the most interpretive therapies like classical analysis have tons of supportive elements woven in.
Absolutely. And Strachey himself, way back in 34, seemed to see this coming. That last sentence of his paper.
Yeah, where he says mutative interpretation being ultimate doesn't exclude things like suggestion, reassurance, abreaction.
Exactly. He acknowledged they're part of the toolkit. It's like he designed the core engine, but knew you needed the chassis, the wheels, everything else to make the car go.
It really challenges that old either thinking, doesn't it?
It does. So now we tend to think more along an expressive supportive continuum, balancing interpretation with skillful relationship management. And that relationship management isn't just some fuzzy background factor, it's technique.
And like you said, sometimes the most supportive thing is being deeply understood through a spot-on interpretation.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's rewind a bit. What was the specific puzzle Strachey was trying to crack with this paper back in 1934? Why did he feel the need to write it?
Well, he basically felt that psychoanalytic literature, despite agreeing on many technical points, hadn't really nailed down the why. Why do these techniques actually work? What's the mechanism? His paper was a, quote, tentative attack on that problem.
He looked back at Freud's earlier ideas, right? Around 1912, 1917, Freud's focus was on resistance analysis.
The idea then was that neurotic symptoms were defenses against unacceptable unconscious thoughts. So make the unconscious conscious symptom gone. Simple, right?
Apparently not. What were the problems?
Two big ones emerged. First, the patient's mind actively fought back resistance. It wasn't just forgetting, it was an active pushback.
And second.
Second, even when the analyst figured out the unconscious issue and told the patient, and the patient intellectually got it, the symptom often just stayed there.
So intellectual insight wasn't enough. Not real consciousness, as Freud put it.
Right. Freud used this map allegory. The bad thought is in one part of the mind map, the analyst's information is in another. They had to be brought together. But resistance, the same force that caused the symptom, was blocking that connection.
So Freud realized the main job wasn't just digging up the past, but tackling that present-day resistance.
Exactly. The focus shifted to demolishing the resistance. But how?
Transference enters the chat.
Right. Initially, Freud saw transference, those feelings the patient develops for the analyst, mainly as positive libidinal energy.
Like a helpful force.
Yeah, the extra force needed to persuade the ego to drop its defenses, like using suggestion, but to undo repression, not create it.
But it got more complicated than that.
Much more. Hostile feelings came up. Intense erotic feelings could actually increase resistance. Plus, there was the worry about cures based purely on positive transference being temporary, like suggestion leading to dependence.
So what was the breakthrough?
The huge discovery was realizing you could analyze the transference itself. That became the absolute core of the treatment.
Because the patient starts replaying their original conflicts with the analyst, the transference neurosis.
Precisely. What first looked like a complication, this messy replay of old patterns in the consulting room, turned out to be this incredible opportunity.
Why an opportunity?
Because now you weren't dealing with dusty old memories. You were dealing with a live, immediate situation right there between patient and analyst. The patient could work through the conflict in real time and choose a new outcome, leading to much deeper, more lasting change.
And Freud's later idea of the superego fits right into this, connecting back to Strachey's auxiliary superego.
Absolutely crucial. Freud saw the superego as key in setting up and maintaining those repressions and resistances. The analyst, by stepping into the place of the patient's superego or ego ideal, could influence it.
How did people run with that idea?
Well, there were different takes. Alexander talked about maybe demolishing the superego entirely. Rodot, looking at hypnosis, talked about a temporary parasitic superego.
But analysis aimed for something different.
Yes, analysis aims for a permanent integral change within the structure of the superego itself, not just borrowing the analysts temporarily.
And Melanie Klein's work on introjection and projection. How does that fit?
Klein's ideas were hugely influential for Strachey. Her concepts of internalizing, introjecting, and externalizing, projecting the objects of id impulses helped explain what Strachey called the neurotic vicious circle.
Explain that circle.
Okay, so the patient feels aggressive impulses, they fear retaliation, so they interject a really harsh, punishing internal figure, a savage superego. Right.
Then, fearing this internal figure, they project it out onto the world, seeing others as menacing. This makes them feel more hostile and defensive, which reinforces the need for the harsh internal critic. And round it goes. Fear breeds aggression, which breeds fear.
A nasty loop. So how does analysis break it?
Strachey's idea was that analysis creates the breach in that circle. The mutative interpretation helps the patient become less frightened of their own superego.
Wow.
By experiencing the analyst not acting like the dreaded archaic object. So if they're less scared internally, they project less terrifying images externally. They feel less need for hostility. This allows them to interject a less savage object based on the analyst.
And that diminishes their own aggression.
Yes, it sets up a benign circle instead. Less fear, less projection, less hostility, kinder interjection, less internal fear, leading towards healthier development.
And the analyst as auxiliary superego is key because they operate based on reality, on the here and now, not the patient's archaic fears. Precisely. They help kickstart that benign cycle. You see, connecting this all up, it shows analysis isn't just talking about feelings, it's about fundamentally changing the internal rules, the programming by which you see yourself and the world. Rewriting the OS, like you said.
It makes sense. Now, interpretation itself, it often gets talked about like this almost mystical tool, doesn't it? The magic weapon.
Right. There are all these contradictory ideas floating around. Interpret too soon, you lose the patient. Don't interpret deeply enough, you lose the patient. It sounds impossible.
So how did Strachey see it? How do you actually use this mutative interpretation effectively?
Well, his key principle was minimal doses. Change doesn't happen in big dramatic flashes, it's gradual. The result of, quote, immense numbers of minute steps.
So no psychoanalytic bombshells.
Ideally, no. Because if you release too much id energy, too much raw feeling or impulse all at once, it can overwhelm the patient. They might get incredibly anxious or even just leave therapy. The system can't handle it.
Which brings us back to that delicate balance for the analyst, especially in phase 2. They absolutely have to avoid behaving in a way that confirms the patient's fantasy, whether it's the bad object or even the idealized good object.
Exactly. If the analyst gets sucked into playing either role, the patient can't make that crucial distinction between fantasy and reality. The opportunity for change is lost.
Strachey called it a paradoxical fact, didn't he? That the best way to help the patient distinguish fantasy from reality is to withhold reality as much as possible.
Except for those minimal doses delivered via interpretation, yes.
And this is why simple reassurance, while it might feel good momentarily, isn't mutative in Strachey's view.
Correct. Reassurance might calm anxiety by making the analyst seem like a good fantasy object, but it actively prevents that vital second phase, seeing the difference between the fantasy and the real person. So no lasting change to the superego.
So it's incredibly precise. Not just what you say, but how and when, and critically, how you don't behave. It's like psychological microsurgery, aiming to give just enough reality to trigger a shift without flooding the system. Are there specific qualities these interpretations need to have?
Strachey outlined a few key ones. First, immediacy. The interpretation has to connect with an eyed impulse that is live at that moment, emotionally charged, right there in the room.
The point of urgency.
Exactly. Melanie Klein thought picking out that point of urgency was one of an analyst's most vital skills. It has to feel relevant now.
Okay, what else?
Depth, interpretations dealing with early repressed stuff. Now, these are often feared because they can stir up a lot of anxiety, those explosive possibilities.
Understandably.
But Strachey argued that sometimes, especially in really tough cases, interpreting an urgent, deep impulse might actually be safer than trying to soothe things on the surface, which could just build more tension underneath. It's counterintuitive.
Definitely takes courage from the analyst.
Yeah.
And the third quality?
Specificity. Mutative interpretations need to be detailed and concrete. Vague hand-waving allows the patient's defenses to just bat it away. Glover warned that even slightly inexact interpretations could be anti-analytic, maybe letting the patient repress things even deeper.
Interesting. What about abreaction, just letting off steam emotionally? Where does that fit?
Strachey saw it as potentially helpful, sometimes accompanying a mutative interpretation, and the results can feel real. But he believed the effects were mostly temporary. It didn't bring about that fundamental qualitative change in the superego, an ancillary factor, not the main event.
Okay, so immediacy, depth, specificity. Now, probably Strachey's most debated point. He strongly believed that only transference interpretations could be truly mutative.
Right. Yes, that was his firm stance. Only interpretations focused on the here and now relationship with the analyst could kick off that chain reaction leading to superego change.
Why was he so convinced?
Two main reasons. One, transplant's interpretations are inherently at the point of urgency. The feelings are happening now towards the analyst. Two, it makes it much easier for the patient to do that crucial reality testing, comparing the fantasy object with the real analyst sitting opposite them.
And interpretations about things outside the therapy, extra transference interpretations, he saw those as less effective, even risky.
Less effective, yes, and potentially riskier. He worried they could lead to patients becoming interpretation fanatics, just intellectually playing with ideas or creating chaos in the material Reich's analogy of the bad archaeologist digging things up randomly without context.
Digging up ruins without a map.
Something like that. But crucially, he didn't say extra transference interpretations were useless. Far from it.
Oh, okay, so what's their role?
He saw them as essential feeders for the transference. They prepare the ground, bring material to light that eventually gets drawn into the relationship with the analyst. He used a military metaphor, trench warfare.
How did that go?
Transference interpretations are like capturing the key strategic positions. Extra transference interpretations are the general advance, consolidating the territory around those key points. A normal analysis, he said, involves this constant oscillation between the two. You move back and forth.
That makes more sense. It's not all or nothing. Which brings us to something you touched on earlier. This process isn't just intense for the patient. Giving a mutative interpretation is a crucial act for the analyst, too. Potentially dangerous.
Dangerous in a psychological sense, yes. Strachey highlighted that the analyst is deliberately provoking eyed energy from the patient energy that is alive and actual and unambiguous and aimed directly at himself.
That sounds incredibly exposing.
It is. It puts the analyst's own relationship with their unconscious impulses, their own internal world, right to the test. Can they tolerate this intense feeling directed at them without resorting to defensiveness?
Like asking too many questions, or jumping in with reassurance, or giving vague interpretations. Those could be signs the analyst is struggling.
Exactly. Those could be ways the analyst avoids facing that direct hit of eyed energy, which, again, raises that broader question, doesn't it? In any intense relationship, therapeutic or personal, how often does our own discomfort with the other person's strong emotions stop us from really being present in a way that could help them grow?
It's a very powerful point. It really underscores the analyst's own internal work being vital. Okay, so let's try and pull this together. Strachey's legacy, his contribution. It was really about providing this incredibly detailed, step-by-step picture of how deep, lasting change happens in psychoanalysis.
Yes, moving beyond just saying interpretation works to showing how it works, microstep by microstep. He actually summarized his whole hypothesis in 4 main points at the end of the paper.
Let's recap those first.
First, the goal of therapy is to help the patient's mind, stuck at an infantile level, move towards a normal adult state. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Second, the main change that makes everything else possible is a deep, qualitative modification of the patient's superego, that internal critic.
Right, changing the internal rules. Third,
This change happens through countless small steps via those mutative interpretations, delivered by the analyst who is both the target of the patient's id impulses and acting as that auxiliary superego.
and finally, the fourth point, which we discussed earlier.
Yes, that even though mutative interpretation is the ultimate factor, it doesn't mean you exclude everything else. Suggestion, reassurance, abreaction, they all have their place as elements within the overall treatment.
He really covered his bases there, showing both the core mechanism and its place within a broader clinical reality.
He did. It's why the paper remains so influential.
So, a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. What really stands out for you here? Strachey pushes us to see that real transformative change isn't just about learning new things or having insights. It's about that deeply personal, sometimes difficult encounter with a different kind of reality within a relationship, one that allows us to modify old, deeply ingrained patterns.
So, the question to ponder might be, how could you apply this idea, this need for a new relational experience to shift old patterns, not just to therapy, but to understanding any significant change in perspective or belief in your own life? Where have new relationships or experiences allowed you to update your own internal operating system?